Months go by and he's still free. He's still out there. He was able to come into our lives, and the only thing further he could have done was kill us.
Sacramento's East Area rapist has struck in at least 2 other cities.
I always had faith that he would be caught, and then a year goes by and you're not healed, you're not better. And then 3 years go by and now it's okay, he got away with it. I didn't hear anything further from law enforcement. There was no closure, there was no justice for forever.
He's been called the East Side Rapist. He's been called the Visalia Ransacker, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer.
13 murders, at least 50 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries.
For years, this was just a boogeyman with no face.
All of Sacramento was a victim of this man because we couldn't stay indoors at night and leave a window open or leave a screen door open. It really was a time of sheer terror.
Here in Sacramento, I don't want to say it was a small town, but it felt kind of small. You know, you worked for the government, you worked for the military, you worked in agriculture, and that was pretty much it.
We'd play out in the streets, come in when the street lights came on. Not even once did I ever think that where I lived was a dangerous place.
Sacramento at that time was just kind of a lazy, quiet community where people raised their kids. You didn't have to lock your doors, and that all suddenly changed in 1976.
My hands were tied and I was blindfolded and my child was with me.
Early on in this, the police did not want the news media reporting about this. There was a fear that we were going to scare the guy away and they would never catch him. His 10th victim was a case in the Carmichael area of Sacramento County.
I don't believe they came public until the 5th attack, and I was the 10th, but the 5th attack happened in October, and I was in December. I certainly didn't read the newspaper, and my parents didn't discuss it, so I didn't have any clue that there was danger in our community. It was December 18th, 1976, and I was 15. That night, my parents went to a Christmas party. I went to play the piano. I heard a noise, and I stopped playing, and I listened, and it was gone. And all of a sudden, there was a knife at my throat. He kind of came in from the side, and he pressed it hard against my throat and said, you know, make a sound and I will kill you. I disassociated right then and there, and I just did as I was told. He took me through the laundry room out to the back yard to the patio table, and he tied my wrists and gagged me and blindfolded me. He cut off my clothes, and then he left me there. So I could hear him cussing and ransacking. I really was just waiting, and at that age, I didn't know what I was waiting for. So then he came back and took me in through the house and into my parents' bedroom where he raped me, and then took me back outside to the patio again. Then he came back, got me again, and this time in the family room he raped me, and I couldn't hear anything, and so I would just like move my arm, and he was right there. He was right, like perched right next to me, and told me, do that again, today it'll be your last day. Finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. So this time I moved again, and there was nothing. And then I rubbed the blindfold off. I figured out how to get up, bound, and then I went and called my neighbor. And I told her to bring your dad, I've been raped, bring a knife.
It became a point where it wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen again, it was just a matter of when.
By late fall, when the East Area rapists began claiming 2 and 3 victims a month, citizens began buying everything they could think of to protect themselves. Gun sales are way up.
You couldn't buy ammunition because it was sold out. You couldn't get locks. And women were taking self-defense classes.
There was one time early on, maybe 3 months after, there was a news report.
He told the female victim in effect that if he saw anything in the newspapers or on television or heard on the radio, anything about this latest attack, he would kill 2 people tonight.
And that was really scary to me. I knew I was going to be killed that night. And not I thought, I knew. My sister and I, we just stayed awake all night waiting.
In the 70s, we didn't have DNA. We didn't have the science we have today. We had some very traditional type of forensic evidence, fingerprints, sketches.
It got very scary for people because now he knew how to find them. The word evil comes to mind. They were being victimized again.
We had massive town hall meetings where hundreds of people would show up demanding to know what is going on, what are you doing to protect us?
The woman is usually the first one to awaken, and the only thing that is visible is the round light and the shadow of a gun being pointed directly at her.
Carol Daly, she worked on so many of these cases.
There also weren't a lot of women in law enforcement back then. She connected with a lot of the victims and still is connected with the victims.
After working 27 of those cases, there wasn't a night went by that I didn't close my eyes and think about what those victims went through.
She was not on my case. So afterwards, the police were called. At that time, they were not trained on how to interview a victim of sexual assault and having to go through it. And the questions that I was asked, that was really traumatic for me. My parents came home and I was so full of shame and embarrassed that I wouldn't let them in the room. From there, you go to the hospital and you have a rape exam. That's 3 times, the rape, the interview, and the rape exam. I don't think I did process it at all. I just went through the motions, not just when I was 15, but for years. So we were told, I think it was the next day, from my dad, to never talk about it. And it was such a strong order, I guess. My sister and I talked about it for the first time when I was 58 years old.
This was spread over a relatively, large area of East Sacramento, from Rancho Cordova in the south to Citrus Heights in the north. He escalated, they became more violent. Now there was the MO of tying up the couple, having the husband or the boyfriend on the floor. They put the glassware on him so that if that person moved, he would hear that. And then he would proceed to attack the woman in another room.
It was very well publicized. We weren't concerned for ourselves because we were 40 miles south. Stockton's a port city like Sacramento. It did have a reputation of being a little bit more dangerous place to live than Sacramento. When we purchased our home, we certainly purchased in a very nice looking neighborhood. It appeared to be idyllic. Bob, who is my husband of 42 years, I met up with him in Stockton on a blind date, and we haven't been apart since. We had heard footsteps under our window previously, but again, the idea that the East Area Rapist would come to our address was just not even in our thoughts. It was March 18th, 1978. We went out to a restaurant, we attended a late movie, and we just called it a day and went to bed. I was certain I was going to die at any moment. I was forcefully restrained And my husband was the same way, because the attack went on for so long that I felt like I had left my body at one point and was telling myself, don't be in this moment with this person. And I didn't know what that was until really the last few years. I engaged in trauma therapy, which didn't exist back in 1978. And I came to understand that that's called disassociating. I wasn't so sure he had left. It was more like I just couldn't not move any longer. And so I sort of just started to move and yell for my husband. I worked myself inch by inch down to the bedroom, and together we got the receiver off the telephone, and I was able to dial the 0 behind my back. We did not know it at the time, but he had murdered the Maggiore couple in Sacramento less than 30 days before our attack.
About 3 years after they started in 1979, it all stopped. No one really knew why.
Given the limitations of technology at that time, I can honestly look back and say there was no stone left unturned.
The statute of limitation at that time, it was 3 years. And that was a hard benchmark to pass.
You could forcibly rape a woman or anyone, and it was a probation eligible case.
We believe that rapes cannot continue the way they have, and that we don't want to stand intimidated.
There was a rally that went on at our courthouse demanding that the laws involving rape be changed. The laws changed as a result of that, but we are bound by the law that exists at the time of the crime.
I thought he was dead. And all these years, I just found a way to deny it. All these people, unbeknownst to me, were trying to find him. I'm so grateful that these people didn't give up when I did.
I came back to Sacramento as a prosecutor in 1996, and then in 2000, I said, we should start a cold case unit, and we should start with the East Area Rapist because of the trauma that he inflicted on so many folks. I made a phone call down to Paul Holes from the Contra Costa Lab, and coincidentally, he was doing the same thing in terms of looking for rape kits to see if they had biological evidence. Then he had DNA testing done on those kits, and it was at that time that they confirmed the connection to a series of murders in Southern California. I mean, I was fortunate to get elected as DA here in 2015. In late 2017, Paul Holes came up and pitched this idea of genetic genealogy.
We ended up generating a DNA profile from the Golden State Killer evidence, and then we're able to take that profile and upload it into a open source public genealogy database called GEDmatch. GEDmatch then is able to search that profile against the other public profiles that individuals have placed in there.
A core group of folks began trying to build out these family trees, and you start looking to see, is there somebody related to these folks that could be a potential suspect?
And lo and behold, Joseph James DeAngelo turns out to be living in Sacramento County.
We started some surveillance. We were able to get some discarded DNA.
Now you're not dealing with having to interpret a mixture. You're saying this is the same guy as that guy. The Golden State Killer, who left his DNA in multiple cases back in the 1970s and 1980s, is Joseph DeAngelo.
Well, he did turn out to have a law enforcement background, and not a very distinguished one. He worked for the Auburn Police Department for a time and was fired.
Once it was discovered that he had been arrested for stealing dog repellent and a hammer, the reality set in like, oh my God, this is real.
It's thousands of hours of sleepless nights between investigators and the victims and the families and the community.
42 years later, Carol Daly was the first one to be here to support me. She came to my house, brought me my police report. My husband came home early from work. I called my sister, and that is when I said, Mom and Dad aren't here. Robin, we can talk about this now. Carol came and she put me at ease right away, and she said, I know I need to be here to support you. 21 days later, he was captured.
Joseph DeAngelo isn't just the Visalia ransacker or the East Area Rapist or the Golden State Killer.
Today, it's our pleasure to call him defendant.
"13 murders, at least 50 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries that we know of, committed across California."
Sacramento, it was the epicenter. This is where he lived.
DeAngelo's arrest came at his home. He was living a fairly unremarkable life when they found him.
I have no doubt he thought he'd never get caught.
It was disbelief. And then a flood of emotions came through that over 40 years I didn't realize were still there.
To find out today there's actually a person and that he's been in Sacramento all this time is shocking and horrifying.
I was in shock. All those things I had not dealt with, it was time to deal with them.
Now I'm not wondering as I'm walking down the street or going about my business, doing work, whatever I was doing, that I could be talking to that man.
I bought 42 roses, one for each year since I had been attacked, to show Anne Marie how grateful I was that she didn't give up.
This person is finally going to see justice for all of his victims, for the ones who can speak and for the ones who cannot speak.
He was ultimately charged with 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnap for purposes of robbery. Even though we know he committed 50 or so rapes, we were not allowed to prosecute all of them because the statute of limitations had run.
No charge at all for him on my case and many others.
It was a great surprise to me after the arrest that they could charge some of the cases with the crime of kidnapping, with the use of a firearm, because there was no statute of limitations on that. But my local jurisdiction would not press charges. And that was, I'd say, the most traumatic thing that I had to deal with after the arrest.
The survivors really created a network for each other. When we would get together here, they would bring their moms, and their dads or their children. It wasn't just a survivor sister thing, it was a survivor family.
We talked for hours on the phone before we met.
Yep.
I had not gone to any of the hearings until I met you. And you said, "I'll go with you, I'm going." It became known that DeAngelo wanted to plea. We let them know what we thought would be an acceptable resolution.
He needs to say he did this. Just because of the statute of limitations, you don't get to ride free of this.
The message was very clear to him and his lawyers. He was going to not only plead to all the charges, but he was going to admit what we call the uncharged acts. And we did not seek the death penalty on that.
I had so wanted my case to be charged. At the same time, I realized reaching a plea agreement for life without parole and ending the process would benefit everyone. And there would be no appeals.
These rapes and these murders, in the words of our victims, have cut across families, friends, generations, and entire communities.
Regarding the uncharged offense of rape of Jane Doe, number 24, having occurred December 18th, 1976, you admit or deny that?
I admit.
They actually read the details of the rapes out loud for people to hear. And it was hard because I was hearing details of my friends now, not just of other rapes. I don't know if I could have done that all by myself.
It was a really almost cathartic process to go through the plea agreement and then the impact statements. 42 years. That's a very long life sentence for somebody who had done nothing to deserve such hatred and violence and desecration of my body.
He stole my innocence, my security, threatened my life, threatened the lives of my family. I was 13 years old.
My world was small, predictable, and safe. It was my one and only opportunity to face him and to tell him what I felt.
Joseph DeAngelo, whether you understand or acknowledge the depth of your depravity, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you will spend the rest of your life in prison, and I survived.
Mr. DeAngelo will spend the rest of his natural life and ultimately meet his death confined behind the walls of a state penitentiary.
I was able to face him. I could now begin to leave the dark part behind me and start moving towards the light.
For those that lived through this, there was some sense of closure.
It's okay to open your window again. I mean, the most common thing we hear from Sacramentans that live through it is, you know, they miss the Delta breeze. And so I hope they open their windows tonight.
I think the legacy of the case is these women have come together, helped each other cope with this, and move forward from this.
The community was so affected by Joseph DeAngelo in the 70s. Once he was caught, there was support everywhere. I wanted to pay it back and to give that support to so many women and men out there that have suffered in silence.
Chris decided to establish the Facebook group.
So the group is called Sexual Assault Survivors. It's time to tell your story. And the group is open to anyone, victims, survivors, supporters. And the reason why it's not just open for survivors is because if that were the case, we're still keeping it a secret.
She decided to take it a step further and hold some events in the garden of her home. When I first walked into Chris's backyard in 2019, and I met the other survivors of the Golden State Killer, I thought it might be very triggering for me, but it was wonderful. It hit me that we were all the same, and all of these vibrant women with careers and families and successful, beautiful human beings. It helped me to be able to put my burden down and just say, yeah, I've been carrying this around with me for 40 years, and I don't have to carry this. This isn't mine to carry.
Mostly what I would like people to take away from this group is that they can be free and they can speak. It just depends on how they want to express themselves.
Chris's mural started out as a very personal little endeavor, and then she opened her tree up to other survivors. One of the things that she had painted was a bird in a cage. And as the time had gone on, she had painted the bird leaving the cage, holding a key in its beak.
We're so terrified to pick up the key and walk out that we remain in this isolated self-imprisonment. The key is right there to open up this prison door, and all you gotta do is use it.